In the grand and violent theater of naval warfare, some ships become legends for their victories, their names echoing through history as symbols of power and triumph. Others are remembered for a single, dramatic demise, a final, fiery plunge into the abyss. But a few, a very rare few, have a story that is far more complex. Their tale is not one of simple victory or defeat, but of immense potential, groundbreaking innovation, and tragic irony. They are the ships that could have, and perhaps should have, changed the course of a war, but were instead shackled by politics, starved of resources, and ultimately betrayed by fate. This is the story of such a ship, a vessel born of fascist ambition, a masterpiece of Italian engineering that was both feared and flawed. This is the story of the battleship Littorio. To understand the Littorio, you have to understand the sea she was built to command, the Mediterranean. To the ancient Romans, it was Mare Nostrum, our sea. In the 1930s, Benito Mussolini was determined to make it so again. He dreamed of a new Roman Empire, and at the heart of that dream was a powerful navy, the Regia Marina, that could dominate the Mediterranean, challenging the established power of Great Britain and containing the growing threat of France. For years, naval development had been restricted by treaties, but as the world order began to crumble, a new naval arms race was ignited. The catalyst for Italy came from its neighbor and rival, France. The French had laid down two revolutionary warships, the Dunkirk and the Strasbourg. They weren't quite full-blooded battleships, but they were fast, powerful battlecruisers armed with 330mm guns, designed specifically to hunt down and destroy older Italian cruisers. They posed a direct threat to Italy's control of the central Mediterranean sea lanes, the vital arteries connecting Italy to its colonies in North Africa. Italy's response had to be decisive. It couldn't just be an equal, it had to be a superior. The result was the Littorio class, a new breed of super battleship designed to be faster, tougher, and harder hitting than anything afloat in the Mediterranean. On October 28, 1934, the keel of the lead ship, Littorio, was laid down at the Ansaldo shipyards in Genoa. The name itself was a potent symbol, derived from the fascio littorio, the bundle of rods and an axe that represented the authority of ancient Rome, and had been adopted as the primary symbol of Mussolini's fascist party. This was not just a warship, it was a physical manifestation of a political ideology, a 45,000-ton statement of intent. From the outset, the Littorio was a vessel of superlatives. Her design was a masterful blend of speed and protection. Her hull stretched over 823 feet, 250 meters in length, and she was powered by 8 Yarrow boilers feeding 4 Beluzzo-geared steam turbines. This immense power plant generated over 128,000 shaft horsepower, pushing the colossal ship through the water at a staggering 30 knots, or about 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour. This made her one of the fastest battleships in the world, capable of choosing when and where to fight, a crucial advantage in the naval chess game of the Mediterranean. She was a greyhound among wolves, able to outrun older British battleships and outgun almost any cruiser that could hope to catch her. But speed meant nothing without a punch, and Littorio's was devastating. Her main armament consisted of 9 381mm or 15-inch guns. These were the most powerful naval rifles ever mounted on an Italian warship, housed in 3 massive triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. The Ansaldo Model 1934 guns were 50 calibers long, meaning the barrel length was 50 times its diameter, which allowed them to fire a nearly 2,000-pound, 885-kilogram armor-piercing shell at an incredibly high velocity. The shells left the muzzle at over 2,800 feet per second, 870 meters per second, giving them a maximum range of nearly 26 miles, 42 kilometers. At typical battle ranges, these shells could penetrate over 16 inches, 400 millimeters of solid steel armor. They were designed to kill other battleships, to punch through the thickest protection, and detonate deep within an enemy's vitals. However, these incredible weapons had a dark secret. The high velocity that gave them such great range and penetrating power came at a cost. The barrels wore out quickly, and more critically, the the shells had a tendency to disperse widely at long range. The tight shell groupings necessary for accurate, destructive salvos were often frustratingly elusive. It was a flaw that would haunt the Italian fleet, a nagging doubt in the heart of their most powerful weapon. Protection was the third part of the battleship trinity, and here, Littorio's designers employed both conventional and highly innovative solutions. Her main armor belt was over 11 inches, 280 millimeters, thick, composed of cemented steel designed to shatter incoming shells before they could penetrate. Her decks were layered with up to 8 inches, 200 millimeters of armor to protect against plunging shells and aerial bombs. But the most revolutionary aspect of her defense was hidden below the waterline. It was called the Pugliese Torpedo Defense System, named after its inventor, General Umberto Pugliese. Instead of trying to create an external bulge to absorb a torpedo's blast, the Pugliese system was entirely internal. It consisted of a large, hollow drum, 12 feet, almost 4 meters in diameter, that ran the length of the ship's vital machinery and magazine spaces. This drum was sealed and surrounded by liquid, either fuel oil or water. The theory was that when a torpedo struck, the explosive energy would be absorbed and dissipated by the liquid and the crushing of the hollow inner drum, preventing the main hull from being breached. On paper, it was a brilliant and weight-saving concept. In practice, its effectiveness would be a subject of intense and bitter debate. After nearly 6 years of construction, the Littorio was commissioned into the Regia Marina on May 6, 1940, just 1 month before Italy officially entered World War II. Her entry into service, along with her sister ship Vittorio Veneto, caused immediate panic at the British Admiralty. The Royal Navy's Mediterranean fleet was largely composed of older, slower battleships from the World War I era. Ships like the Warspite, Malaya, and Ramillies, while valiant, were simply outclassed in speed and firepower by the new Italian Titans. The balance of power in the Mediterranean had shifted dramatically. Italy now possessed the strategic advantage. The Regia Marina adopted a fleet-in-being strategy. They didn't need to seek out and destroy the Royal Navy in a decisive battle. Their mere existence, the simple fact that these powerful ships were lurking in their heavily defended bases like Taranto, was enough. They posed a constant threat that forced the British to dedicate immense resources to containing them, resources that were desperately needed elsewhere. Every British convoy to Malta, every naval operation, had to be planned around the terrifying possibility that the Littorio and her sister might sortie. For the first few months of the war, this strategy seemed to work. Littorio conducted patrols and sorties, but no major engagement occurred. The real test of the ship and the Pugliese system would come not from another battleship, but from the air. The British, keenly aware of their disadvantage in capital ships, planned a daring and unprecedented operation. On the night of November 11, 1940, 21 antiquated Fairey Swordfish biplanes, fabric-covered aircraft that looked like relics from a bygone era, took off from the deck of the new aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious. Their target was the heart of the Italian fleet, the naval base at Taranto. The attack was a stunning success. Flying low and slow through a storm of anti-aircraft fire, the Swordfish pilots dropped their torpedoes into the calm waters of the harbor. The Littorio, sitting at her mooring, was a prime target. She was struck by 3 torpedoes. The first hit on the starboard bow, tearing a 23 by 20 foot, 7 by 6 meter hole in her hull. The second struck the starboard quarter, near the stern, ripping a massive 50 by 30 foot, 15 by 9 meter gash and destroying her outer steering gear. A third unexploded torpedo was later found under her keel. Water poured into the ship. The much-vaunted Pugliese system had been put to the ultimate test and, in the shallow water of the harbor, it had failed to contain the damage. The ship's bow slowly sank into the mud of the harbor floor. The pride of the Italian Navy was crippled, not in a glorious gunnery duel, but while sitting at anchor, humbled by a handful of obsolete biplanes. The raid on Taranto was a strategic catastrophe for Italy, but it was also a testament to the skill and determination of the Italian engineers. The salvage operation was a monumental undertaking. By December, she was refloated from the harbor bed and placed in dry dock. In a remarkable feat of engineering, She was fully repaired and back in service by March of 1941. But the lesson was clear. The age of the battleship, as the undisputed queen of the seas, was coming to a violent end. After her repairs, Littorio re-entered a war that was intensifying. Her first major action came in December 1941, during the First Battle of Sirte. Littorio was the flagship of an Italian force covering a convoy to Libya. They encountered a British force of cruisers and destroyers escorting a lone merchant ship to Malta. In the fading light and deteriorating weather, the engagement was cautious and indecisive. The Italian commander, fearing torpedo attacks from the nimble British destroyers in the darkness, chose not to press his overwhelming advantage. The British ships escaped, and a golden opportunity to annihilate a significant enemy force was lost. It was a frustrating and anticlimactic encounter that highlighted the Regia Marina's often overly cautious doctrine. 3 months later, in March 1942, Littorio would get her chance for redemption. This was the Second Battle of Sirte, and it would be her finest hour. A critical British convoy, codenamed MW-10, was making a desperate run to the besieged island of Malta. Littorio, again serving as flagship under Admiral Angelo Iachino, led a powerful force to intercept. What followed was one of the most brutal naval battles of the Mediterranean campaign. The weather was atrocious, with gale-force winds whipping the sea into a frenzy and thick smoke from the defending British destroyers obscuring visibility. The much smaller British escort fleet, composed of cruisers and destroyers, fought with incredible bravery, charging the mighty Italian battleship to defend their convoy. Through the smoke and spray, Littorio's 15-inch guns roared. It was the kind of chaotic, close-range brawl that battleship designers had never anticipated. At one point, Littorio was straddled by shells from British cruisers and engaged in a furious gun duel with destroyers charging to within torpedo range. Despite the storm, her gunners performed well. She fired almost 200 main battery shells, scoring hits on the British cruisers Euryalus and Cleopatra and the destroyer Kingston. She was hit herself by a 4.7-inch shell from a British destroyer, causing minor damage to her fantail. The British escort was battered and forced to withdraw, but they had succeeded in their primary mission. By their suicidal bravery, they had held off the Italian battleship long enough for the convoy to scatter and escape under the cover of the storm, for a time. Though most of the convoy's ships would later be sunk by air attacks, Littorio had proven her mettle. She had faced down a determined enemy in horrendous conditions and had inflicted more damage than she received. It was a tactical victory, but the strategic situation in the Mediterranean remained unchanged. The Second Battle of Sirte was the high point of Littorio's career. After that, her greatest enemy became inaction. The crippling factor that had always loomed over the Regia Marina now became critical: fuel. Italy was a nation with immense industrial capacity, but almost no domestic oil production. Every gallon of fuel oil had to be imported, and as the war dragged on, Allied blockades and attacks on tanker convoys tightened the noose. By mid-1942, the Italian fleet's fuel reserves were dangerously low. A battleship like Littorio consumed tons of oil for every hour at sea. Sorties became rare luxuries. For most of the next year, the pride of the Italian Navy, one of the most powerful warships on the planet, sat idle in port. She was a caged giant, a fleet in being that could no longer put to sea. The strategic threat she posed was evaporating with her fuel supply. Then, in the summer of 1943, the entire foundation of Italy's war effort collapsed. Allied forces landed in Sicily, and on July 25th, Mussolini was deposed and arrested. The fascist regime that had built Littorio was gone. In the ensuing political chaos, the ship's name, so closely tied to the fallen dictator, was changed. She was officially renamed Italia, a name that reflected the nation's desperate attempt to break from its recent past. The new Italian government, led by Marshal Pietro Badoglio, publicly declared they would continue the war alongside Germany, but secretly they were negotiating a surrender to the Allies. The Armistice of Cassibile was signed in secret on September 3rd, but it was publicly announced on the evening of September 8, 1943. The news sent shockwaves through the Italian armed forces. For the crew of the Italia, it was an order that struck at the very core of their honor. The entire Italian fleet, including Italia and her two sisters, Vittorio Veneto and the newly commissioned Roma, was ordered to sail from their bases and surrender to the Allies at Malta. This was the ultimate humiliation. To hand over their magnificent, undefeated ships to the enemy without a fight felt like an act of profound betrayal. Confusion, anger, and despair swept through the mess decks and the command bridges. They had been prepared to fight and die for their country, but they had never been prepared for this. Reluctantly, under the command of Admiral Carlo Bergamini, the fleet steamed out of La Spezia on September 9th, heading for their grim rendezvous with destiny. Their former German allies, however, had no intention of letting the Italian fleet fall into Allied hands. The Germans had been preparing for Italy's defection, and they immediately launched Operation Axe to seize control of the country. For the Luftwaffe, the Italian fleet sailing in open water was a tempting target. Flying from bases in southern France, a squadron of Dornier d'Eau 217 bombers took off. They were armed with a revolutionary new weapon, a harbinger of a new age of warfare, the Fritz X radio-controlled guided bomb. The Fritz X was essentially a 3,000-pound, 1,400-kilogram, armor-piercing bomb fitted with fins and a radio receiver. A bombardier in the parent aircraft could steer the bomb during its descent, guiding it with pinpoint accuracy onto a target. It was one of the world's first smart bombs. The German bombers found the Italian fleet off the coast of Sardinia. The sky was clear, perfect conditions for the attack. The Italian ships, having been ordered not to fire on former allies without direct provocation, were initially caught by surprise. The bombers soared high above the effective range of the ship's anti-aircraft guns and released their deadly payloads. The crew of the Italia watched in horror as the bombs fell, not in a random pattern, but with an unnerving, deliberate trajectory. The first attacks targeted the flagship, Roma. 2 Fritz X bombs struck the battleship in quick succession. The second one plunged through her decks and detonated within her forward magazines. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. A column of fire and smoke erupted from the heart of the ship, and the mighty Roma, which had been in service for just over a year, broke in two and sank in minutes, taking Admiral Bergamini and over 1,300 sailors with her. The attack was not over. The bombers now turned their attention to the Italia. A Fritz X bomb was guided towards her. It struck the foredeck, just ahead of the forward main turret. It pierced through the light deck armor, passed completely through the hull, and detonated in the water beneath the ship. The underwater explosion was immense, buckling the hull plates and causing severe flooding. The ship took on over 800 tons of water, but her bulkheads held. Her speed was reduced, and she was damaged, but she was alive. She had survived a direct hit from a weapon that had just obliterated her sister ship. It was a testament to her robust construction and a stroke of incredible luck. Battered but still defiant, the remnants of the Italian fleet, including the wounded Italia, limped onwards towards Malta. Their arrival in Malta was a somber, surreal affair. The once proud flagships of the Regia Marina sailed into the Grand Harbor, the historic bastion of their British enemy, and surrendered. For the crews, it was the end of their war. For the ships, it was the beginning of a long and frustrating purgatory. After a brief stay in Malta, the Italia, along with Vittorio Veneto, was moved to the Great Bitter Lake in Egypt, part of the Suez Canal. Here, in this saltwater lake in the middle of the desert, she would spend the rest of the war. Her skeleton crew maintained her machinery, but there was nowhere to go. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. The mighty warship, designed to dominate the Mediterranean, was reduced to a silent, rusting monument to a failed war, her guns pointing uselessly at the Egyptian sky. When the war finally ended in 1945, the fate of the surviving Italian ships was decided by the victorious powers. As part of the war reparations, the Italia was awarded to the United States. The U.S. Navy, however, had no use for her. They had a vast fleet of their own modern battleships, and the maintenance costs for a foreign-designed vessel would have been prohibitive. The offer was declined. For a few more years, she languished, her future uncertain. Finally, in 1948, the decision was made. The great battleship was to be scrapped. She made her final voyage back to the shipyards at La Spezia, not far from where she had been built. and over the next few years she was slowly dismantled, her armor, her guns, and her powerful engines reduced to scrap metal. The story of the Littorio, the Italia, is a story of immense contradictions. She was a triumph of naval architecture, one of the finest battleships of her generation. In her brief moments of combat, she proved to be a tough, resilient, and powerful foe. Yet her potential was never fully realized. She was a weapon of war that spent most of the war in port. She was a ship designed to win a decisive battle that was instead crippled at anchor, starved of fuel, and ultimately surrendered without a fight. Her end came not at the hands of her declared enemy, the Royal Navy, but from the guided bombs of her former ally. The Littorio represents both the peak of Italian naval design and the strategic failures that doomed the Regia Marina. She was a sharp, deadly spear wielded by a hand that lacked the strength and resources to throw it effectively. A true titan of the sea, whose legacy is a powerful reminder that the fate of even the greatest warships is tied not just to their own strength, but to the turbulent currents of history, politics, and war. What a journey, from a symbol of fascist power to a war prize nobody wanted. The story of the Littorio is a stark reminder that even the most powerful machines of war are at the mercy of human decisions and the simple, grinding reality of logistics. It makes you wonder what other incredible stories are out there, gathering dust in the archives. We are always on the hunt for new targets, for those forgotten legends and technological marvels whose stories deserve to be told. So, what military topic, vehicle, or battle are you burning to see covered? Drop your suggestions below. Consider it your mission briefing to us. If you enjoy these deep dives into military history and want to ensure you catch our next investigation, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We've got plenty more to explore together. Thank you for joining us on this voyage.